Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Australian adoption of the GCCA Global Ratings for Low Carbon and Near Zero Concrete webinar organised by Cement Concrete and Aggregates Australia. My name is Michael Kilgariff and I'm the CEO of CCAA. So just a couple of admin issues. Please note that the Q&A function is open to this webinar with time allocated at the end to answer questions. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session. Should also advise that this webinar is being recorded and the recording, the guide and the presentation slides will be circulated to attendees later today via email. And of course, this webinar will be best viewed in full screen. So the agenda for today, the formal launch will be done by Di Newey, the Director of Stakeholder Engagement of CCA. The background on the GCCA Global Ratings for Concrete by Dr. Andrew Minson, who is working with GCCA in London, but of course we do claim Andrew as one of our own, as a graduate of Queensland University. The explanation of the Australian adoption, Matthew Curley, National Technical Manager, Cement Australia. The rating system in the market by Hudson Worley, Chair of MECLA, with whom we have formed a very close collaboration in the development of this guide. Di Newey will then facilitate the Q&A and then we'll close and move on to the next stages. So just a little bit about CCAA, for those of you who don't know, we are the voice of the heavy construction materials industry in Australia. Now in 2021, the industry released the Decarbonisation Pathways Report, which committed the industry to net zero by 2025, 2050. 2024, we released the Decarbonisation Facilitation Plan. So sustainability is a key strategic policy issue for CCAA. So just a quick overview of our members. Of course, many of you would know the foundation members of CCAA. However, we have a number of other members that many of you would also be familiar with, largely cover about 90% of the industry in Australia. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Di to undertake the formal launch of the Australian Adoption Guide.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're delighted to officially launch the Australian adoption of the GCCA Global Ratings for Low Carbon and Near Zero Concrete. We have released a guide today. It'll be available on our website immediately following the launch. And we thank you for all participating on this important day. This represents an industry-led step supporting Australia's transition to low carbon construction and net zero by 2050. The launch has been spearheaded through the CCAA Sustainability and Technical Committee, and we thank all our member representatives for extensive contributions and consultation. And as Michael said earlier, we have worked very closely with GCCA and we're delighted to have Dr. Andrew Minson join us today to take everyone through the background of the very important framing and global devices from the rating system. This will allow Australian concrete mixes to be assessed according to concrete emission rating bands. The way that the tool will operate will be explained by Matt Curley, who will join us as a presenter after Andrew. And it does align with the GCCA global system. However, we have extended the strength grades out to 100 MPa and down to 5 MPa. And we have also adopted it in a way which is appropriate for our local grades. Other than that, it is very well aligned and we are net in reporting, as is the GCCA master framework. As mentioned earlier, it's been developed with GCCA and we thank you for that ongoing collaboration across many areas, including this rating system adoption. And we have consulted extensively and will continue to do so and collaborate with MECLA. This is an important enabling system for our Pathways report, which Michael talked about earlier. It was released in 2021. It was developed with the Cement Industry Federation, ourselves, and also through support by Smart Creek CRC and Race for 2030 CRC. And we acknowledge and thank them for their involvement. There are 8 pathways in our roadmap, and this one actually relates to the design and construction pathway, and also the use of cementitious materials, supplementary cementitious materials, which is, of course, a key enabler and critical to manufacturing lower carbon concretes. Then in 2024, late in 2024, we further expanded on that Pathways report by co-releasing with CIF an industry decarb facilitation plan. I would encourage anybody who hasn't had the opportunity to review that facilitation plan in detail to find that on our website, because it gives a really good explanation of how the pathways can be enabled and implemented in the market in practical ways. The industry objectives there, the area of focus. Of course, this all relates to making the procurement of lower carbon concretes simpler, easier, and more transparent. And we look forward to the rating system being implemented and applied in the Australian market in the coming months. And we will continue to work with all our demand stakeholders there. So it's a great enabling tool for the low carbon concretes, which everybody knows are currently available and will continue to be available into the future. And this is a way where you can actually rate concrete mixes using EPDs data according to their emissions. Keeping in mind, of course, your performance criteria, durability criteria, and other project criteria which still must be met. Once you've determined your mix options, this is an excellent tool to support you in that procurement task. So I'll now pass on to Dr. Andrew Minson, who will take us through the GCCA. Thank you.
Di, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to join you today and for the collaboration over, well, more than months. It's probably been almost a year. So we've been working on this for about 3 years. So I'll just go on to the next slide and give a really high-level overview introduction. As a global entity, we did our formal launch back in April, and I still put that first bullet point there because we've worked with so many stakeholders through this whole process when it's still been in the development stage. I want to make sure everyone knows that we have launched the global ratings. It's cement and concrete, and we're focusing today on concrete. And at the end, I've just got one slide on cement for those who might be operating in different countries where cement ratings are adopted. So the purpose, why we've done this, what are these designed to achieve, is to support low carbon procurement, facilitate environmental reporting, and enable fair product comparison. I'm going to pick up those 3 points on the next slide, and they're not in bold, but maybe it should be, because it's also designed to overcome the problem of lots of different low carbon definitions. Essentially, we foresaw a proliferation of low carbon definitions that was just going to confuse the marketplace. And the third bullet point there, Di has already made it very clear about the importance of ratings and low carbon procurement to the global goal and your national Australian goal of decarbonising the cement industry. And finally, we've designed these GCCA ratings to be made available for country adoption. So we're delighted to be here today at this launch of the Australian adoption. So that second bullet point, I said on the next slide, Mitch, I'll just expand on those 3 points. So in terms of procurement, it's providing clients and governments globally recognized ratings to underpin low carbon procurement. Now, it's not on its own. They're designed to be overlaid with local current data, local information, and therefore being able to set local targets. So it's got this aspect of global, but local as well. And we'll come back to that in a couple more slides. The second one is on reporting. It's allowing organizations both on the supply and the demand side to report and track progress on carbon footprint of products in a consistent manner. And so it doesn't take away company reporting. If you're on the demand side, you might be doing a scope 3 reporting. You probably will accumulate EPDs to develop that scope 3 reporting. If you're on the production side, the greenhouse gas protocol you'll use for reporting your overall emissions as a company. But to track your carbon footprint of your products, these ratings enable you to do that across borders. And the comparability point is something that these ratings deliver. So they enable comparison of concrete products. Now, that any rating system has that purpose, but this, in addition, does it across countries. And it even overcomes the fact that we don't have a global consistent EPD system yet. So fortuitously, the global ratings have been developed in a way that is compatible with the EPD system in Australia. So you haven't got to do any transformation. But for those countries where the transformation is required, our rating system actually is like a Babel fish. If you know that, it actually translates it. So a D in Canada will be a D in Thailand, even though they use completely different EPD systems. And so that comparability is proving quite useful to clients, contractors who are operating globally, and enabling governments to compare what they're doing. Those 3 points are picked up on the next slide, Mitch. And in addition to those 3 points on the far left, there just is a communication. The marketing and the promotion is a fourth reason to have this. That's what these ratings facilitate. And you can see some of the graphics we've got. And I'll come back to talking about our ratings in a bit more detail right at the end. On the right-hand side, we've got example labels at the bottom. And countries are completely at their discretion whether they use those or not, but we provide them if they want to be used. We'll come back to the ratings themselves, but first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about the process of how we've got to these ratings. So as a global body, if you're familiar with, hopefully you're familiar with CCAA, you're at this webinar today. Well, the GCCA really is similar, but at a global level. So why do we exist? We exist because there are lots of global entities, and the Clean Energy Ministerial is one of them. If I had you all in a room now, I'd ask if someone anyone who knows, who's ever heard of this, to put their hand up. I mean, lots of these global entities are not known day to day, but they are influential in the whole ecosystem. And this Clean Energy Ministerial, one of the things they do, one of the initiatives they have is, and if you look at the bottom of the slide, Industrial Deep Decarbonisation Initiative. You can see on the right-hand side, Australia's just joined that. And that's all about procurement. It's procurement of materials, primarily cement, concrete, and steel. And in time, it's going to be projects. And Australia's just joined up to that, and Brazil has signed up as well. And we, as GCCA, almost 3 years ago now, we chose to hitch our wagon and to collaborate with the Industrial Deep Decarbonisation Initiative, because we felt that as an initiative, it was the one that would be most significant in and successful in developing a global scheme, because public procurement is the biggest client. It's 30, 40, in some countries, over 50% of procurement of cement and concrete. And so that's why we've gone with them. So what was their starting point? So if we go on the next slide, we can see that their starting point was what the International Energy Agency did back in 2022. And you can see the reference at the bottom of this slide. 2022, the IEA published this graph. They published one that looks actually very similar, but obviously with different axes for steel. They did it for steel, and they did it for cement, and they published it for the G7 when it was hosted by Germany. And the IEA did a couple of things which were quite new. So on the top right-hand side, you can see the IEA calculated that for the hard-to-abate sectors, steel and cement, there's a remnant emissions by 2050. We can as a society, we can achieve Paris, but the contribution that the steel and cement industry makes, there's an allowable remnant. There's a sector carbon budget, and that's what's represented by the green at the bottom of that graph. And that was the first rating scheme that had been created. And the IDDI, they chose that as a robust starting point because they felt that that was a realistic place to go. It meant that there was consistency between steel and cement, and that's the point that I'm making in the second paragraph. And the third aspect was that rather than the IEA, rather than just doing what other systems had done, I mean, it ends up looking very similar. You've got different ratings, but in terms of the derivation, the difference is that there's this shared destination is a distinction, and there's a global there's a global reference point at the top. So if we go on to the next slide, we can just get a summary of the low carbon ratings. 3 major headings here: objective, robust, credible, and transparent, a perfect balance between global and local, and GCA addresses this problem of many different schemes being created. So first of all, developed with extensive stakeholder engagement through the IDDI, that initiative I mentioned before. Over 100 stakeholders were involved in this process, and actually the outcome, the overview of the ratings I'm about to share with you, they are quite different from where we started. And so this stakeholder engagement did help us shape it. It's based on EPDs. That's really fundamental. It may be in the Australian market an obvious thing, but elsewhere in the globe, that's not necessarily an obvious thing. And so we're very pleased that we've been able to deliver something using EPDs that have got a track record of that credibility and transparency. Earlier, I mentioned this balance between global and local. So it's a global system. It meets the needs of governments, international companies, and those who relate to international companies. And then there's this local aspect. So local, and Di's mentioned it. You can change the horizontal axis to be whatever strengths you typically use. If you use cube strength rather than cylinder strength, you've got the ability to set targets and thresholds in procurement. And finally, there's this point about, we were very aware that at country level, state level, even local level, various schemes were emerging in terms of ratings. And that was obviously problematic. And so therefore we can develop the consistency through our ratings. So if we go on to the next slide, we can just see, I've got 2 slides here on progress. We've got government adoption, private sector adoption, and then finally on the next slide, we're just going to come on to standards. In terms of government adoption, we work very much with these multilateral forums. I've already introduced you to one. There's half a dozen others, would you believe, that we're working with to enable governments at that multilateral level understand what these ratings are. And many of those organizations are calling for harmonization because these governments are wanting to be able to be doing things consistently with their counterparts. In terms of national associations, the first one that has launched was way back in February now. Germany, the VDZ, the Cement Association there, launched their cement carbon class. And I'll just have one slide on that right at the end, just to mention what the cement ratings are. In terms of the private sector adoption, the early adoption, we're just quickly on this. Concrete Zero, you may have heard of them. They've recognized it. We're working with the First Movers Coalition. The Concrete Sustainability Council is that 3rd bullet point. We're doing a pilot with them at the moment in LATAM, and that's going to be launched in January. The ICI is a German development agency. They've got a BEAT assessment method that's building energy assessment tool, and they're using our rating system embedded in that. And we're in discussions with LEED. I know you've got your Australian Green Building Council system. So if we go on to the next slide, we can see the standards that I mentioned. We've got a publication that you can download from our website on how our method does accord with the draft clauses. They're only draft at this moment, but the draft clause is emerging in the European Concrete Standard. And I apologize for the quality of the photo on the right. That was taken 28 hours ago in Atlanta, where a colleague was presenting at the ASTM subcommittee on low carbon concrete standards. So we're working with ASTM, which has got good footprint in the Americas and the European standard. And we look to, eventually obviously embed this as a viable way of fulfilling standards. On the next slide, we're just going to go on to a quick overview. Obviously, on the vertical axis, it's in terms of global warming potential. Horizontal axis, I mean, you're probably all familiar with the MECLA system, so specified concrete strength along the horizontal axis. Now, that isn't perfect. That is not perfect. We know that concrete gets specified not only because of strength, but we and all our stakeholders said, let's go for good to start with. Ultimately, there might be another dimension in this in terms of durability, for example, and many of you on the call will know that there's other aspects as well. So this isn't perfect for 100% of concretes, and it's important to recognize that. So it's good in time when people are familiar with it. Maybe we'll be able to add other dimensions to make it better. And we divide into 8 ratings, obviously, and we've in the concrete ones, you can see here we've retained that concept of a near zero definition. Now, if you go on to the next slide, I won't go through the detail here, but if we just look at the top of the AA band at the bottom, the destination of 2050, it's aligned with net zero. I haven't got time here to explain how we've done that, but you can see at the bottom there, we've got, we launched these as definitions in 2024, and we've got all of that available on our website that you can read in detail if you want to look at that and how that's been derived. So on the next slide, you've got that information on where they're available on our website, that detailed derivation. The assumptions on the EPD is pretty critical if you're not in Australia. As Di's already mentioned, the methodology in Australia is completely linked. In a few other countries, it's not. So that bottom left-hand box is really critical in terms of how they're going to transform the ratings into their country so that their EPDs can talk directly to their transformed ratings. Mitch, only 2 more slides to go. I just want to mention the cement carbon class. So we've got these concrete ratings you've seen. We've also got cement ratings, and the German government and the German Cement Association, VDZ, they developed, actually, would you believe, completely in parallel, but fully aligned. They came up with like the identical system that we had come up with. And so this is the first which has been implemented with it, which fully aligns with us. And even my 1 year of German at high school in Brisbane makes me realize that climate freundlich is climate friendly. So what they're saying in Germany is they aren't using the E and the F. They're not using the E and the F. They're not, they have determined that ABCD and the near zero account as climate friendly. And so this highlights the point that the ratings are static over time and static over space, but the target and what's defined as low carbon varies. So in Germany, D, you have to be D or better to be climate friendly. But in other countries which are about to adopt this, actually E is a really good performing cement. And so therefore E will be climate friendly. But the D in Germany is directly comparable and consistent with the D in these other countries. It's just that what is low carbon, it differs because there's different opportunities and challenges, and there'll be different pathways to get to zero. And the proliferation of concrete ratings, where concrete's even more local than cement, meant that in a huge city, in some big cities, you could have different availability of low carbon concretes in the north and the south, and you'd end up with different ratings changing over time, changing over space, and there being a proliferation and confusion for everyone in the value chain. So to have these static global ratings constant over time gives that consistency. So if we go on the final slide, just a few links. You'll obviously expect we've got lots of stuff on the website that you can go and see. We've got our launch is, you can download that if you want to go back and discover a bit more information. And we've got a little bit of information also 1 year on from when we launched it at COP in Baku, when we announced 2 weeks ago at the COP in Belém, all the things that have been done. I look forward to questions. Please ask questions. That's always the best part of these webinars. Thank you very much for having me. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Matthew Curley, who's going to explain in a little bit more detail the Australian adoption. Matthew.
Thanks, Andrew. Amazing. It's always great to hear you talk and the enthusiasm here, and the importance of this, of having a globally consistent low carbon concrete rating system, and having that common language. So thank you. And I know it's very late there, so doubly thank you. So onto the Australian adoption. GCCA have done the heavy lifting here, right? And this you spoke to it all in terms of engagement of all the international agencies and the like. So those that have been on this journey with us for a long time, it feels like a long time, but I think it's been important that we've taken the time to make sure that these are both data-driven, but also practical and work for Australia. So I'm going to take, there's only a few slides here, but we're going to go through how the numbers were brought together for Australia. And I think, importantly, we've taken the directly adopted the GCCA 20 to 50 MPA modelling system. So the aim here is the same look and feel, but the 20 to 50 MPA is exactly the same as the GCCA 20 to 50 MPA rating system. And that's that goes back to that having global consistency here on how products are rated. So that bit's been taken up. When we engaged our stakeholders and throughout our concrete, the members of CCAA, heavily with MECLA, and everyone was saying, hey, we need a bit more. For completeness, we really need this out from 5 to 100. Otherwise, we're going to have people still devising their own rating systems and their own accounting methods here. So we decided to take that on and really extend the great work that GCCA had given us from 20 to 50 and move it out to capture everything from 5 to 100 MPa concretes. So again, what you can see here, the nice pretty graph with the slopes, but also the table data here, and those numbers for anyone sense checking it, exactly the same 20 to 50, same banding, same spacing, same everything, and then we've extended out. A few things to note. We've got the GCCA was 30 and 35. Obviously, we have 32 here in Australia, so it's just a straight interpolation. And we've also just kept with just the standard strength grades only, so 65, 80, 100. Again, the table is there for those specifiers or otherwise looking at 90s or 70 or any weird and wonderfuls, you can still work it out. But Australian strength grades only. And I do want to say again, a big thank you to all of the contributors and collaborators here. It was a large piece of work, and we got a lot of good help from not only the members in CCAA, but a lot from GCCA and Andrew and his team. We also reached out to the UK counterparts, the MPA, for their take. So we looked at a lot of models to get to this point. And then had a lot of, I guess, a lot of conversation, a lot of discussions. And MECLA were instrumental in this as well, because they had already had their banding system and were able to provide some feedback on what they saw. So on to the next one on how we actually came to these numbers. Thanks, Mitch. So again, I'll just say it again, exactly the same. So 20 to 50, this is the GCCA exact bandings. And what you've got, when we put the Australian EPD data over the top of this. And a quick shout out here to the Jason and Low Carbon Materials Hub. That made this process a whole lot easier. That's a fantastic website for those who haven't visited. It's got all of the EPD data captured and all the data behind it. So we overlaid all of the Australian EPD data. And when we looked at the median EPD values in that 20 to 50 MPa range, we saw a very strong correlation with the GCCA 20 to 50 MPa bands. So that was really important. So it's validated for us the GCCA model and shows us that the Australian EPD data, of which there were thousands of points for each of these, so around 1,000 EPDs for each of these 20 to 50 MPa, and it correlated really nicely. It sits at about just under 75% of the top of D. And that was consistent across the 20 to 50. You can see a little bit of deviation in lines, but it's very minor. So having already confirmed we've got a good correlation with Australian EPD data and the current GCCA modelling, we then extended that out. The next one here, Mitch, we extended that out to 100 MPa. So we took the median EPD data and extended it out to 100, and then kept that same correlation of approximately 75% just under the D line. And this is where all the collaboration happened, right? So we've got the EPD data, but then we looked at the GCCA, we got feedback from them, we looked at the UK models that are already out there, we engaged with MECLA, because while we wanted to use EPD data and have this for Australia, we also wanted to make sure it was practical. And you can see probably a good example of that. There's a slight dip in the median at 65 MPa, just ever so slightly, which again, we really scrutinised and then took some time to go, well, why is that? Does that make sense for our curves to be dipping and diving with the current EPD data? And as Andrew mentioned earlier, it's not about where we are today. It's about setting a model and a consistent rating system that can be used for future. So we decided to smooth that out a little bit, keep a nice consistent curve, and extend out. And what we've got is again, it's a data-driven but a practical approach. So that's where we've landed, and again kept the consistent increments from A through to F, and G is everything above. And then we looked at the lower end. Now this is where it gets a little bit messy. So when you look at the straight EPD data in 5, 10, and 15 MPa, we realised very quickly we can't rely directly on the EPD data, because there are some weird and wonderfuls in that range, right? We're talking lean mixes and stabilised sands, and lots of things that aren't what you would normally class traditional concretes. So, and a lot of it is driven by what EPDs would be published in these low MPAs. So not a lot of data down there, but it was good to look at it and good to scrape through. But I think in the end we relied heavily on again that practical approach from our membership to say, well, where do their normal mixes lie in there? What's our carbon footprint in there? The GCCA, the UK, and where Mechler had done as well, and ended up just having this nice smoothing out those curves a little bit to get something that was practical. So that's how we arrived at the curves, and then obviously there it is again in the graphs and the table, and yeah, I would direct anyone using it to use the table values, right? The graphs are great, but use the table. There's the numbers directly. The only other thing I would say is, and it has been touched on before, is the aim here is this is the basis for reporting and procurement, and it's the first step, right? Getting a consistent language is sort of the first step. So excited to see where this goes and where we take it from here. But really, it's designed for use with verified third-party verified EPD data, and again, Andrew mentioned it, but it's scope A1 to A3 when we're looking at those charts. That's what we're looking at. And the EPD data, we want it compliant with Eco Platform verification guidelines, just so we're doing like for like as much as possible. We've got a consistent way of measuring this. And that's really all I had to say on this. I'm sure there'll be questions, but I'd like to hand over now to Hudson, who's the chair of Mechler. And again, thank you for all the help. Over to you, Hudson.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. And thank you very much to GCCA for including us in today's discussion. My name is Hudson Worsley, Chair of Mechler, and Mechler stands for the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance. There have been so many acronyms today, I'll just add to it by just saying Mechler. Mechler is all about driving a reduction in embodied carbon in construction and infrastructure. And we do that with, through a number of activities. The top and the bottom bullet points here are the key ones for this discussion. And the first one is demonstrating demand. As much effort has gone into the science and the engineering to produce low emission materials, in this case, cement and concrete, building the demand on the construction and procurement side, the design side is also very important, so that there's a market for these lower emission materials. So that's one of the key things that Mechler does. And then the bottom bullet point there about supporting material development, increasing awareness of those materials. Mechler is more than concrete and cement. We have steel and aluminium and other building materials as well. But by bringing the construction ecosystem together, and the next slide will show us that ecosystem, we've mapped out the life cycle of a major project. I think most people in the call will be familiar with that top line there, showing all the stages of a big project. Now, we know it's not linear though. There are material flows, there are decision pathways, there's financial flows, the data flows, and so on. But by bringing the construction ecosystem together, which Mechler's been doing since 2020, we enable conversations so that people, whether they're in procurement or design or engineering, or even concrete places in this case, to understand what is this low emission thing about, and having those conversations before projects start is a really good way of building up the demand and the understanding. Next slide will show that we also look at A1 to A3, but then having a broader view, we extend that into construction and use and end of life. Got to get A1 to A3 in line before we move on, but life doesn't stop there. So MECLA has the longer term view as well, and would encourage anybody to dive into the MECLA resources. Our next slide shows who's involved. When we set out to set up MECLA with WWF and Climate Kick, that's the Climate Knowledge and Innovation Community, we wanted 40 members. Delighted to say that after 4 years, we have 200 or so members. Many of those are financial contributors, others are collaborators. But the key point there is you'll recognise brand names and logos from across the whole ecosystem. It's not just suppliers selling their wares or engineers wondering, how do we specify this? It's the whole ecosystem coming together to understand what each other needs to do to progress to emission reduction in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's our ecosystem. That's who is part of this. And this slide really shows the doing. We call MECLA a do tank. Because we just get on with the barriers that are in the way of reducing emissions in construction and find ways to get stuff done. So that demand signal, that's our first group, looking at how we measure and monitor, providing guidance and clear language. And then there are the various material working groups. So yeah, the key point there is there's no one action that can reduce emissions in construction and infrastructure. But by bringing the different actors together to get stuck in, that's how MECLA works. The next slide just shows some of the activities that we've undertaken over the last 4 years. Lots of organisations involved. We participated in a lot of feedback sessions, providing feedback at a state and national level, and also to CCAA in this case. And that's been terrific to have that harmonisation at a local and international level. Because as you can imagine, anyone who's worked for a national or international organisation, to have different requirements at different state boundaries or different national boundaries is really something we want to avoid. And so we're delighted to participate in this harmonisation endeavour. All right, the next slide shows some of the outputs. We've got low carbon aluminium, as well as looking at roofing tiles, plastic pipes, aluminium, as well as our concrete. And we've got Evan Smith, who's been co-chair and one of the leading authors of our low carbon concrete guide. He'll be part of our Q&A at the end of this. But all of those links are there. I'd really encourage people to dive in. And our final slide talks about the case studies, where the do tank provides case where others have done the work to help bust myths of, I can't use that, never been done before. Chances are it has been done, and we've written it up so that others can learn from that and don't have to go through the experimentation phase themselves. Look, that's all I've got to say from a MECLA point of view. We're delighted to be supporting this alignment and harmonisation, and really encourage industry to take this up. The global challenge of emission reduction is big, but boy, the collaboration to help us get there is fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hudson. Again, we're delighted to have MECLA joining us today, and thank you to Michael, who started us off, our CEO, and then to Dr. Andrew Minson for that very detailed and good understanding of the global framework. And I'd like to also acknowledge Matthew Curley as our Sustainability and Technical Committee member lead on this. He's worked extremely hard and very collaboratively. And thank you as well, Evan, for joining us as that co-lead for all of the extensive work that you've done on the MECLA rating system. That will now adopt this. So we're now moving into questions. I've got just a couple from the participants. I'd encourage people to certainly ask whatever question they have. Andrew, could I ask, I think you, having released this through many webinars over the last year or more, perhaps you could advise us on what typical questions are asked, the most common questions you've received, perhaps, that you'd like to give a little bit of an answer on?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yep.
So I mentioned that we've developed cement and concrete ratings, and so one of the really early questions people say is, well, which or both or what's happening? We're generally finding, actually, as you are doing, that ultimately, as we've heard from Hudson, concrete's what's built from, and so therefore concrete ratings make sense. And so the cement ratings are likely to be used in countries where the predominant product that is sold onto a construction site is cement. And so therefore that's the thing that's sold onto the construction site. So we think that cement ratings are more likely to be used there. But and that's, so for example, South America, Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, but we've actually in India they've flirted with cement ratings, but actually they're almost certainly going to go concrete ratings. So that's a common question people have: should we do cement or concrete? But we're finding, my best bet is that LATAM, South America, will go cement and concrete, but most other places will go concrete ratings, as you've done. Actually, Di, can I just jump in at one point here and just mention the extension of the strength? I mean, I think that an obvious question is, well, what are we going to do globally now that you've taken a lead on widening the strength range? And we, as mentioned, we worked with you closely on that, and that's the strength of your EPD data meant that we think that we've got a really good foundation for us now, picking up on what you've done and adopting that back into our global method. We kept our range quite narrow originally because we were determined to base it on really credible global data that we could absolutely defend. We didn't want these global ratings to fall down by people sort of pointing at 60 megapascal, 80 megapascal, and saying, well, actually you haven't got that much data across your 12 major countries. So that's why we kept it narrow, but we're delighted to have the strength of data you've got and the thoroughness that you've used to justify it, that Matthew's explained, and we'll be feeding that back into our global conversation. Well, we actually already have started that global conversation to extend our ranges.
Thank you, Andrew. That's great. So I've had another question here, Matt. Perhaps you could just reiterate on the reason why we are recommending in our guide the A1 to A3 EPD emissions scope.
So that was to me, Di?
Yes, please, Matt. Thank you.
Again, we're just looking at ensuring we've got consistency with the global standards. So A1 to A3 aligns with what GCCA have for their 20 to 50. So we didn't want to then reinvent or change it from that basis. And as Hudson mentioned, hey, there's a lot more data available if you want to look further into that and sort of delve further into it. But I think A1 to A3 is widely available. We've got a lot of data in that range, and I think it's a good starting point for this without taking the next, well, how far is the project from the plant and starting to get into all of that. It really sets a nice solid boundary around consistent measurements.
Thank you, Matt. We've had another question also about EPD rules, product category rules that change over time. Obviously, there's a need to understand the EPD as you're reviewing it and recognise what the rules are that particular EPD has been published against. Does anybody have any other thoughts or suggestions on how to interpret EPDs when using our rating system?
I can jump in here, Di. If there was suddenly a consensus that we were going to turn the carbon accounting of our products on its head, and a product today that was coming out with a value of X tomorrow came out with a value of 2X, then clearly the rating system would have to change. So you paint an extreme picture like that, and you can see where we're at. If there are incremental changes, I don't see that change happening. With but that would have to be taken on horses for courses. The European standard, which basically is being used globally, has been developed now for over 30 years. The big changes that we see coming in there would be things like, how do we account for carbon capture and storage? So we'll have big changes like that coming in, but they should be reflected in the carbon footprint of the product in a manner that would be completely compatible with the ratings staying exactly as they are currently, and the product just showing a lower rating.
Thank you, Andrew. CCAA is planning to continue to work collaboratively, as we have done to date with MECLA. We are planning to host more webinars in the new year, which will be around how the rating system should be applied. And we know that MECLA will be adopting the data labels and tables and the graph. Could I ask Evan or Hudson, could you just comment on the MECLA guide and your proposal to launch another one in the new year?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I guess with MECLA, it's been a bit of a long history, kind of like initially like looking at what was happening in this space and globally and what was available. And I guess, and then when we were looking to kind of update the data set for our first document we released, had like 1,000 EPD data points in that as well. So by the time we got to like, we're up to about 6,000 mixed designs now in Australia. So we're really looking to kind of update that and actually release that new EPD data so people kind of have that. But we decided to actually hold when GCCA released that global classification. So I think that's what everyone's been looking for. They're looking at, as Andrew was saying, a D in every kind of country and have that kind of global consistency approach. So we're very supportive of that. And then also, I guess, where do those lines go? So we're also very supportive of CCA kind of extending that and kind of making sure that, and that consistency and that linkage in as well. So yeah, MECLA has been very supportive of that approach as well. We're very keen to kind of then, show where the market is in Australia in relation to the CCA, GCCA adaptation as well. And then we're also looking at like, well, how do the states maybe differ as well, like with the different types of materials that are available as well. So yeah, very keen and very supportive of what you guys have done. And yeah, really keen to kind of, start using the guide, which is what it's designed for.
So if I could jump in there as well, I think one of the points of credit I'd like to give Evan and his colleagues who prepared the MECLA guide is it's a how-to guide. Yes, it has the bandings, and it's terrific that it will be updated to include the new broader bandings. But because the working group that developed this has suppliers, it has researchers, it has the CRC for Smartcrete, but it also has users. And so it's gone through a step of, well, how do you specify this? What do you ask for? What levels of data? And it's an applied, I talked about us being a do tank, the doing of, okay, well, we've got this guide that's harmonized globally. Fantastic. What do we do next? That's, I think, where the MECLA guide can really add value.
Thank you, Hudson. Thank you, Evan. That's great. We also had a question about how the rating system will be picked up by rating agencies in Australia. How might that work? CCAA has been collaborating and engaging over the last months with a number of rating agencies and also with the users and the demand side. Those stakeholders are already using lower carbon concretes, and they're very excited to have this built on the MECLA guides of the past and the GCCA framework. We will continue those discussions and engagement to ensure that we work together on how this will be adopted into rating systems that are operating in Australia, just to ensure that we don't get unforeseen or non-productive outcomes, if you like. Obviously, there's a lot of factors in procurement of low carbon concrete. You need to be mindful of the application that you're procuring for or specifying. You need to be mindful of the region in which you're procuring concrete. and also your durability and performance requirements, of course. All of those need to be carefully studied when we look at how it may be adopted into a rating system. And obviously, we are very keen to get this guide out there, and we look forward to the demand side stakeholders coming back to CCAA so that we can expand our network of collaborators. Thank you. Andrew, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. I see you.
Yeah, I just would jump in terms of procurement. I mentioned that that international initiative that Australia's just signed up to, the IDDI, is doing product and project. Ultimately, we're all involved in the built environment, and we're wanting to deliver for society the lowest carbon projects in whole life and whole life carbon over the whole all aspects of the project. And we saw Hudson, show that diagram of the different stages. And so it is important. There is a point at which each product is procured, and so therefore that's why we've got across all the different materials, we're trying to work out how do we procure the right product at that point when you've already specified it and you know exactly what product you want, and you're comparing different products to that specification. But we mustn't forget that the building obviously needs to be procured as a whole life, whole carbon, sustainable, resilient project. And we need to get the procurement of that right. And that's a much more complicated problem. But the whole is much more than just the sum of the parts. And so there's aspects that concrete can deliver which are non-structural. Speaking of structural engineer, the concrete does a lot more than just the structure. It can deliver the acoustic performance. It gives you the fireproof for free. It gives you the flood resilience and whatever. So it gives you all those other things. Often it's the finishes as well as the structure, so you don't need to put other finishes on it. So there's lots of other aspects that mean that ultimately, if you're involved in a project, you want to be procuring a whole life, whole carbon, and minimizing that, rather than just thinking, well, at the point of procurement, I'll leave it to my contractor or my subcontractor to procure the lowest of whatever's been specified. The other people up the supply chain, structural engineers like me, architects, other people, have got a really important role to play in making sure the overall project is the most sustainable.
Thank you, Angel. That's excellent. So we've had a question of how the NECLA guide will operate with the CCAA Australian Adoption Guide. I think we've answered that, which is that the NECLA guide, Evan and Hudson will take on board the CCAA graph and will then, overlay it and work, as you said, on how it can be used and how it can be applied in the market based on all of your knowledge and expertise of your working groups, and also as a follow-on from version 1 of your guide. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so directly bring that across. Let people see what's available in the market with the EPD data as well, and then those other things as well that were, like Hudson mentioned as well, like those common questions, I think, like considerations, all that extra information, I think, as well, like, and common questions that we normally get when people are looking to specify low carbon concrete.
Thanks very much. Andrew, just a question, if I may. Here around LCI data continuing to be used over more generic eco-embed data or other platforms, have you got any insights globally on how it's being applied?
So I just lost you there for a second. About eco-embed data, did you say?
Yes, EPD platforms. Just a question around how they're being adopted globally. Is it all on eco platform globally, or?
Yeah, we're getting globally, we're not at the perfect outcome of the same EPD standards and exactly the same approach globally, but we're pretty close there. And eco-embed we've chosen eco-embed as a basis for our ratings because eco-embed is absolutely the most popular database but it actually allows, obviously, as people who know the details here, that the flexibility to add in local underlying data as well where that's available. In terms of availability of software, I'll say we've got a software tool that helps suppliers do it, which we provide, for free to our members and at cost to non-members. Other software is available, obviously, as well. The ecosystem of verification, obviously, you guys know what's happening in Australia, but globally, one of the most frequent questions we get is on how we can strike the balance between having credibility of the EPDs in terms of the verification process, but actually reducing the costs. Because that definitely is a challenge you can imagine in some of the emerging markets. So we're working with various others within the ecosystem of EPDs and verification, the program operators, to enable that balance to be struck between credibility and cost.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, to all our presenters and all the participants who joined today. We're actually now in our last minute, so I'll now close and just talk to the next stages, which is that we will be hosting further webinars and we'll keep everyone updated on those. We'll be sure that you're invited. We look forward to ongoing market collaboration, and we look forward to the market application of the new rating system, which we have launched today. And we'd encourage you all to have a look through our guide, which is now available. Thank you all.
Thank you, Di. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.